Hey everyone, it's later on in the day. I have a question to ask. What sort of losses have you experienced in your cancer journey? So I'm assuming you're in a cancer journey, or it might just be life, but what sort of losses have you experienced in that journey? And I was thinking about, for me, the cancer journey has been a series of losses. At first, it was a loss of a sense of peace and my identity at first, right? I'm a cancer patient now, and now I have to deal with this shadow hanging over me. And I didn't understand that at all yet. At 21, 22 years later, now I'm so used to it, I can say that I have peace on this journey. But the loss of that, then it was the loss of time with having to do doctor's appointments and at first surgeries and scans and follow-up tests and procedures and all that. So loss of time. And for me, I was a busy attorney at the time and father of six. My kids were 2 years old and 17 years old when I was diagnosed back at age 43. Now they're almost 38 and 22. But back then I had time loss, and I also had energy loss, right? When you go through major surgery and procedures, tests, you're physically spent. And so I had that loss that I normally wouldn't have had. I had an emotional loss of really having to face difficult concepts in my life. Not so much death back then, because I really believed I would be okay, even though the docs were saying to me, if it's outside of the bladder area, you won't live long. But first major surgery, it turned out I was okay. We couldn't find cancer outside of the bladder. That I would have a recurrence 10 years later. But those losses along the way, and even losses for me with having my prostate removed, and I'll just say dealing with incontinence and functionality issues for a guy, that was a big loss. Dealing with the loss of how I normally urinate and those parts that were taken away from me, dealing with that. It was common to go through depression after that surgery. I'd spoken with other guys about it, the radical cystectomy, prostatectomy surgery. So, but on and on, I experienced more and more loss. I think that's common with life, right? I mean, to the point where you're at your deathbed, and as the psalmist said, naked I come into the world, naked I go out. So we experience loss. So then 10 years after that first surgery, I was 2015-14 surgery with 3 surgeons, and it was metastatic, and the news was a 5% chance to live a year to a year and a half back then. Loss again, and not about a year and a half later, sitting in the hospital again, and them sending me home. So besides having to get treatments, losing that time, they said you can't practice law anymore. So I had to leave my law practice, and one thing led to another, and my wife and I were having marital problems. So eventually my marriage failed too. So I had that loss. Just loss after loss after loss of my health, I used to love to run. I was a big time athlete, and I couldn't run anymore. I would bleed. And so the prospect of how do we handle loss, or how do I handle loss in life? And I have to say that without my higher power, Jesus, I think it would have been a lot different for me in handling those losses. I had a sense in my journey that there was a purpose in it, and I was clinging to that purpose, that God had something for me and for others in it. So I was holding on to that, and I was really clinging to Jesus with it, and just giving him these losses and processing sadness and fear especially throughout this journey. There's been fear to process, and that fear is the prospect of even more loss and death and things. So, but just being able to cling to Jesus, to depend on him, to give him my life and my future and those losses I was experiencing, to feel the sadness, to process it. What am I sad about? To apply scripture to a lot of these things, to be able to know that I had an eternal destiny. That's been a big part of my cancer journey, is the fact that I know from an assurance that I have and through scripture that I have an eternal destiny with God. I call it my exit strategy. That's helpful for me too. But all these losses, it's too simplistic for me just to say surrender it to Jesus and process the sadness and stuff. It's not, it takes a lot of, at least for me, it took a lot of patience, endurance, perseverance, to living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. That acceptance piece is so critical. Acceptance is such a critical part of the journey, to know that I'm not in control, I'm powerless, and to accept what's happening to me and trust, surrender and trusting in my higher power that he has a plan and a purpose in it. Huge, huge, huge. Anyway, hope you all are doing well. Thank you.